Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome back to another Planetarium live stream. My name is Patrick Hess. I'm the Planetarium Specialist at Union Station, and I'm so happy to see you all here, virtually see you all here for another one of our live streams. If you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. So glad for you to join us. And if you're joining us having watched one of our previous streams, welcome back. We are streaming live at 6 p.m. every Monday right now since Union Station and the Planetarium are back open to the public. Yeah, that's right. If you missed it, we are open. Last week, we were open to Union Station members, and starting this Wednesday, June 17th, we are going to be open to the public. Tickets are on sale right now. If you do want to come check out one of our Planetarium shows, you can find myself as well as some of our other educators like Jordan, who you may remember chimed in during the SpaceX launch stream. We'll be giving star tours, and you'll be able to check out all sorts of other stuff. Other shows like Magic Treehouse Space Mission, Big Bird's Adventure, as well as a mission to Mars. A lot of cool stuff. And again, tickets are on sale now. Science City is open also with sessions in the morning and afternoon. So check that out. Of course, you can find more information at unionstation.org for all of this. We can't wait to see you back in person at the Planetarium. But we're also excited to keep these streams going since you all seem to enjoy them. And we're closed to the public on Mondays and Tuesdays, so this is a perfect opportunity to take things virtual. What we're doing for these Monday streams is we're going to do a little mixture of our Star Tour content as well as more deep dives. And if you didn't know, we've been doing deep dive streams previously on Wednesdays for the past few months, where I've dived into a topic in astronomy. And we've covered a lot of different topics, like we took a tour of the solar system a while ago. We talked about stellar evolution. We learned all about the Golden Record, a message that humanity sent on the Voyager space probes out to potentially other life forms out in the universe. And some of our most popular shows have been diving into worlds of fiction and astronomy in fiction. We've talked about things all the way from Terry Pratchett's Discworld to A Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones novels. And we did an entire show all about Harry Potter's connection to astronomy. And if you missed any of these and want to rewatch them, you can check out recordings of all of our streams on our Facebook pages at Union Station's page, or if you haven't liked and subscribed to the Planetarium's page, be sure to do that. That is the Arvin Gottlieb Planetarium. You can find more fun facts and information all about space, as well as recordings of our previous streams. Today we are going to be taking another deep dive, and this is going to be part of sort of a mini series. I'm going to be honest, I don't know how many there will be, for sure 2, because we are going to dive into sky cultures. We're going to talk about how different cultures throughout the world and throughout history see the night sky. Now, if you've tuned into our Monday streams before we were open, we were diving into a lot of Western astronomy, and we were taking a tour of constellations that a lot of people are already familiar with, based on many Western traditions. But of course, there are more mythologies and traditions out there besides just Western mythology. And we've talked about it a little bit, and there seems to be a lot of people interested in this, hopefully. So we are going to be taking this Monday and probably next Monday to dive into a few different cultures. And today we're going to be focusing mostly on Egyptian astronomy, as well as a little bit of traditional Chinese astronomy, and we may take a little bit of a look at the Aztec mythology as well. I'm planning probably on focusing next Monday all on Native American constellations and astronomy, just because there is a lot to cover. Of course, Native American culture is not monolithic. There are a lot of different tribes and traditions throughout all of the Americas, North and South America, including the Aztecs, and I think there's enough content there to cover an entire show. So we're probably going to focus most of that on next week's program, but we may touch on it a little bit today. As always, don't forget to comment in the comment section of these streams, and I'll give you a shout out. And if you have any questions, be sure to ask them live, and I'll try to answer them live as well. And if you're watching a recording of this, you can always ask a question in the comments after the fact, and we'll try to write these down so we can answer them in the future. And I don't think we have any pending questions from last time, but if you did ask a question and we missed it last time, throw it in the comments right now, and I will try to answer it for you. But we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to jump over to Stellarium, our trusty Planetarium software. We've used this quite a bit already, and don't forget, this is a free piece of software you can download for yourself. This is available for Mac and PC, and there are similar programs you can find for iDevices, Apple devices, as well as Androids. And so we're going to start out in here. All right, just checking to make sure I didn't miss any comments. So we're going to start out. Let's talk very briefly about our Western astronomy. And this is our typical horizon here, but I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm actually going to hide the ground, which we can do in Stellarium here. So I'm going to go over to the landscape, and then I'm actually going to switch to a 0 horizon, which just gives us a flat horizon here. I'm going to also pull up our settings configuration, I believe, and we're going to go over to, is this the section I want? I don't think it is. We're going to go back, sky and viewing options. Let's see. Yes, so in the sky options, we can turn off the atmospheric visualization. Actually, I want to go back over to landscape, and I'm just going to hide the ground as well. So we can kind of imagine that we're floating out in space now, just looking at a star field surrounding us. There's the sun shining brightly there. Without the atmosphere, we can see the stars in the daytime. And this will just let us look at all of our night sky here. I'm going to put up a grid. This is the equatorial grid. And basically, if you imagine a globe where you had longitude and latitude, if you extended those lines straight out into space, we would have this grid right here. All right. Ooh, I'm seeing some shout-outs in the comments. Leanne, thanks for tuning in. I am glad you're here, and I'm glad I'm here as well. Eric says Yahoo, and I'm glad you're excited to have us back. And Susan, hello. Thanks for chiming in. All right, so we are, again, looking at our constellations that we're familiar with. There are 88 of these sort of official constellations. They were picked back in 1922 by the International Astronomical Union. Now, I need to be specific about what a constellation is, because we're going to be talking a lot about star patterns here, and we're going to be technical today, because a constellation is not a star pattern. I know this is kind of confusing, and we've touched on this a little bit before, but I'm going to turn this grid off for just a second, because to an astronomer, constellations are not star patterns. Constellations are regions of our night sky, and if we mapped out these regions, the sky looks more like a big puzzle. Yeah, let me see if I can make these a little bit easier to see. Nope. Here we go. All right. So those are the constellation boundaries. So to an astronomer, a constellation is a region of our night sky, kind of like a state boundary. And these are really helpful to astronomers, because when you find something in space, like a deep space object, supernova, something like that, you care less about what star pattern it's close to, and you care about where it is. So basically, if you found something, say, in this region of the sky, you would say that it is in the constellation Cassiopeia. So to scientists, that is what a constellation is. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is less related to science and more related to just astronomy tradition and different cultures and how they looked at the stars. So for today, what we're going to be focusing on are asterisms. Now, I brought that word up before, but just to define it once again, an asterism is an actual star pattern. So the way we connect the dots in the sky, that's called an asterism, sort of an unofficial group of stars. And the reason we have this different designation is because, again, there are many different cultures throughout the world who see the stars in a lot of different ways. And even though these Western constellations might have star patterns you might not recognize. If you've got a friend with their zodiac sign tattooed on them, and you double-checked and looked at our star patterns here, it may not match up exactly, because there are different interpretations of these star patterns, since they're less associated with science and more associated with history and mythology and astrology sometimes. So many of these, so just to touch a little briefly, we're not going to talk too much about the stars themselves, and there are many different star names from different cultures. Most of the star names we're familiar with are from Arabic astronomers, but I just wanted to mention that we are going to focus mostly on the star patterns here. Now, 48 of these 88 official constellations came from Ptolemy, who was a astronomer a long time ago, about 1,000 years ago, around the year 100 to 170, and he was I disappeared. Thought I was going to go over here. There we go. He was a Greek astronomer who wrote about constellations in a book called the Almagest. Do I have? Yep. This is a 1500s transcription of it in Latin. A lot of confusing translations, but this is just a very old book about stars, basically. This is one of the oldest surviving comprehensive ancient writings on astronomy, and these 48 traditional constellations were adapted from a lot of ancient Greek mythology, a lot of stories that we've talked about during our star tours, like Hercules or Virgo or Leo the Lion and things like that. That comprised a lot of the northern constellations, since the Greeks only saw the northern hemisphere of stars. So the southern constellations, they were added later on throughout the 15th to 18th century as European explorers started to travel to the southern hemisphere, and they came up with these constellations as tools for navigation. So let's go back over here. We'll put the star pictures up here, some art to go along with them. And I'm going to put the equatorial grid on again. So again, this is sort of mapping out the stars in relation to the Earth. So again, a lot of the northern hemisphere constellations, these are from Greek mythology. But the southern hemisphere constellations, if we look at them, you'll notice that some of them are more related to exploration, like a boat or a sail, or compass tools, a triangle, even there's a telescope constellation, and then some other animals that are sometimes associated with some of those southern explorers, toucans, fish, things like that. They use constellations like the Southern Cross here as navigation, which we've talked about a little bit during previous star tours. Then, of course, there is the Zodiac, the 12 constellations of the Zodiac. The historical origins of this are not totally known, so to speak. These astrological divisions became prominent around 400 BCE in Babylonian astronomy. And we've talked about the Zodiac a little bit during previous tours. A lot of the traditional pictures that are associated with the constellations came from Johannes Hevelius's Celestial Catalog, which is from 1690, and he was an artist who depicted the constellations. And a lot of times, like if you search on Wikipedia for a constellation, a lot of times that art is from this catalog from the 1600s. So these Western astronomy traditions date back quite a while, but they are not the only star traditions, and we're going to take a look at a few different and notable ones today. And before we do, I want to check our comments. We got some other shout outs. Michael saying hello from Excelsior Springs. Thanks for tuning in. Brooklyn and Maverick are watching. Hey, thanks for joining us, guys. And Tammy saying hello from Iowa. And they're saying thanks for still doing these, and thanks for tuning in. I recognize a lot of these names popping up once again, and that's kind of cool that we've got some followers who've been watching for a few streams. So thanks again so much for joining us. And Michael asked a question: what constellations are visible in our area this time of year? And that's a question that you can find out the answer to by either coming to the planetarium and watching one of our live star tours where we take a look at our evening skies this time of year, or if you want to watch last week's live stream, we did a star tour that Monday as well, and we'll be kind of cycling between traditional star tours and this deep dive content during our Monday streams. So I would encourage you to check some of those out. We don't have time to dive into that today because we are going to talk about some other star cultures, and we call them sky cultures. Astronomers refer to these different groups of patterns as sky cultures, and here in Stellarium, that is how you find them as well. So if you go to the sky and viewing options in the star lore section, not to be confused with Star-Lord, the Marvel Comics character, that has a huge list of a lot of different cultures, and we're going to be looking at we're going to be focusing on some listed here, and there's some great write-ups you can find here, as well as references and links to other information you can read more about these sky cultures. And if you're interested in some that we don't talk about either today or next week, then pop a comment in the comment section, because we may, if there's enough interest, cover them, these other cultures in future live streams. So I'm going to start with Egyptian astronomy, and I'm going to switch to the Egyptian star culture here. And as you can see, when I click on it, it changes the line patterns here and the names. And sometimes there's art associated with them, sometimes there isn't. And then there is a bit of a write-up here. But I've got some other information for us in talking about Egyptian astronomy. And Egyptian astronomy dates back quite a while. In Nabta Playa, there are stone circles, and these date back to the 5th millennium BCE, so that was 7,000 years ago. There are these stone circles that still exist today, and these stone circles, some of them have been weathered over time. Obviously, 7,000 years is a long time, but historians generally agree that these stone circles were associated with star patterns, and these patterns have been linked to some ancient star shapes. Now we also have to remember that the stars actually do slightly change over the course of thousands of years. There is precession, which is the wobble of the Earth's axis, which changes the North Pole. And then there's something I haven't talked about yet called proper motion. Now, all the stars in our galaxy are orbiting around the center of the galaxy. Now, this orbit, one full circle around, takes a very long time, hundreds of thousands of years, sometimes millions of years for certain stars. But they move quickly enough that we can measure these changes. And if you think about things on a scale of thousands of years, the actual shapes of the constellations differ very slightly. And stars move pretty slowly in the scheme of human life, but they do slightly change. So some of these star patterns we do have to adjust for these proper motions and precession and things like that. Now, by the 3rd millennium BCE, many Egyptian cultures were already using a 365-day calendar. And the observation of the stars generally was important to figuring out things like the annual flooding of the Nile. And there's a constellation we'll talk about associated with that. A lot of historians agree that many of the Egyptian pyramids were carefully aligned towards pole stars at that time. Again, the North Star, Polaris, was not the North Star during these times. There was actually different stars that were the North Star. If you want to learn more about that, I'd encourage you to check out some of our previous star tours. That's generally so. Egyptian culture spanned thousands of years. By the time that the Greco-Roman cultures were spreading throughout the world, though, their beliefs started to influence Egyptian cultures. And by the Ptolemaic period, which is around 50 BCE, that's 50 years before the Common Era, by the way, which starts at the year 0, just to be specific there. By then, there were a lot more connections between Greek astronomy and Egyptian astronomy. There's a really great example of this at the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, Egypt. This is a picture of the ceiling of this temple. This was restored a few years ago, so these colors are actually original. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of ancient cultures painted a lot of their stone carvings and statues. A lot of Greek and Roman statues were actually painted. So these colors are all real. They were just restored using, restoration techniques that didn't damage them. So this temple depicts a lot of Egyptian astronomy at that time, around the turn of the millennium. One of the main things was actually taken from this temple a few hundred years ago and is in the Louvre in France, if you want to see it. But this is a giant sky disk that maps out the Egyptians and how the Egyptians saw the stars. And this is fairly rare because a lot of most Egyptian depictions of astronomy were in these rectangular forms. They often didn't depict the stars in this sort of modern way that you can think of it, but this is from that time period, and the stars were depicted like this. Now this depiction, which I have a bit of a more detailed photo there, was centered around the North Pole star at the time, which again was not Polaris, it was a different star. That would have been Thuban, I believe, at that time, which is a star close to the North Star. And yeah, so there are a lot of similar constellations to Greek mythology. If we go back over to Stellarium, we can see some sort of similar patterns. There are a lot of differences, like Orion here. We can recognize the star patterns, but as you can see, the lines there are quite different. But then we have Cassiopeia, which is almost identical to its modern shape. And we have the Big Dipper here. And, Leo the Lion is basically the exact same, as you can see. Let's go back over here. So Ursa Minor, the little bear, at that time was depicted as a jackal, which represented Anubis, the Lord of the Dead. The inner circle here of Yep, right there, the inner circle of this star map. It was composed of the traditional 12 zodiac symbols. So by this time, they were pretty widely accepted around the world. Some of them were depicted as their familiar Greco-Roman shapes, like the ram, Aries and Taurus, and Scorpio and Capricorn. A few of them were different, though, and had Egyptian influences. Aquarius, for example, represented the flood god Hapi, who was holding two vases that were gushing water. And this constellation matches up with Aquarius. And Aquarius, when that constellation is rising in the early evening sky, that signified the annual flooding of the Nile. That's how they predicted these things. So a similar stories to the Egyptian story of Aquarius, the god of rain. Yeah, it's kind of cool to see those influences overlapping there. Cancer the crab is another one. It was represented by a scarab beetle. Around the edge of the disc, there are 4 women and 4 pairs of falcon-headed spirits that hold up the sky. The outermost ring features 36 spirits, which represented the Egyptian year, those 365 days. The planets were also referenced in Egyptian astronomy. They were called the stars that knew no rest because they were constantly moving around. And again, this was at a time when many did not know the difference between those stars and planets. They just saw them as points of light in the heavens, and the stars seemed fixed in the sky, whereas the planets would move as they orbited the sun at their own pace. To the Egyptians, the planets' movements across the heavens reminded them of 5 gods sailing across the sky in their solar boat. Jupiter represented Horus, who limits the 2 lands. Mars was Horus of the horizon. Mercury was Sebegu, who was associated with the god Set. Saturn was Horus, the bull of the sky, and Venus was the god of the morning. Venus, sometimes known as the morning star. So that is just kind of a little picture of Egyptian astronomy. We can continue along here and look at some other analogies to Western astronomy. So there is the Big Dipper, which represents part of a bull. Again, Leo the lion, representing a lion as well. And moving around here, there are some constellations in the southern hemisphere, as Egypt is a lot further south than Kansas City, closer to the equator, so they were able to see a lot more of the southern hemisphere. Let's put the clip back on so we can see the constellations of the southern hemisphere. So this is a big part of ancient cultures and how they saw the sky. What they could see of the sky influenced what they saw the stars as. Here is Scorpius, in this case representing part of a boat. So we are going to move right along over to Chinese astronomy. Now, again, I do want to mention that all the cultures we talk about here, we're trying not to consider them as monolithic. Egyptian culture and Chinese culture spans thousands of years. Some would even say tens of thousands of years. So we want to make sure that we are not thinking of these as just one people seeing the stars as in one way. What we're looking at during these deep dives is we're going to be just looking at general interpretations that try to incorporate as many of the overarching feelings about the stars at the time, and I'll specify when we are looking at, because that makes a difference too. When you're talking about, as we talked about with Egyptian astronomy, they were influenced a lot by Greco-Roman astronomy after a certain amount of time. So again, we're going to dive into Chinese astronomy now. Just gonna pop on over here. Looks like Gail chimed in. Gail loves Union Station. So do I. I'm so glad you love it. Union Station's a great place, isn't it? I am very lucky to work there. All right, so let us talk about Chinese astronomy, and we're already going very long, so I'm going to go ahead and say now we probably won't get to any of that North American astronomy during our stream today, but I promise we will cover that next week. So let's jump over to Chinese astronomy. Now, Chinese astronomy is very different. It developed completely independent of Western astronomy and astrology that we consider today, so there are very few similarities with the star patterns. In general, during a lot of Chinese history, the emperor's astronomers were responsible for producing a calendar each year, so astronomy was very closely tied to the culture of ancient China. As an overview, the ancient Chinese had an understanding of the 5 visible planets as being tied to the 5 elements that they considered. Mercury representing water, they called it the water star. Venus was the metal star. Mars was the fire star. Jupiter was the wood star, and Saturn was the earth star. Kind of interesting how they associate those quite differently. You know, they weren't associated with deities like Western cultures. They were associated with elements and things that kind of made up the world. In a similar way, the sun and the moon were tied to the duality of the yin and yang, which kind of are tied to the translated names of the sun and the moon, which the sun being Taiyang and the moon being Taiyan. And again, we're not considering Chinese culture as monolithic. There are hundreds of different languages spoken in these places, and a lot of different cultures as well. But we're speaking very generally and focusing on ancient Chinese astronomy as it was recorded and sort of distributed throughout history. So the Chinese asterisms, the star patterns, are very different from the Greco-Roman constellations we are used to. They are quite a bit smaller, and there are quite a few of them. They called them the Xingwan, which means star officials. That's how it's translated. And a lot of these we're referencing from a 13th century stone carving from Suzhou, which shows 283 of these asterisms. And I think we might be upside down. No, that's the North Pole. Okay, great. All right, so let's talk about these. So the way that the ancient Chinese astronomy worked is that the sky was divided. Well, there are a couple different ways to look at it. One way they looked at it was dividing the sky. Oh, by the way, this is the stone carving, the Suzhou stone carving. We can kind of imagine this as kind of all right, I'm totally blanking on the name of that famous tablet that was so useful in translating many different things. The Rosetta Stone, that's right. Sort of a Chinese Rosetta Stone for ancient Chinese astronomy. So these 28 regions that they divided the sky into were called mansions. They were called the 28 mansions. And unlike, well, these are very closely tied, or more tied with astrology than astronomy, in the sense that these regions were tied to yearly cycles, and in a similar way to astrology, the different constellations represented different parts of the year and different traits associated with those things. One different thing, though, about Western astrology is that these 28 mansions, and they were divided into 4 symbols, which we'll talk about in a moment, were actually based on the moon ecliptic. So unlike Western astrology, which is derived from the path of the sun through the sky, these were actually related to the path of the moon. So it's kind of cool where that little difference lies there. This is just zooming in to look at these 28 mansions. We kind of divide them radially, moving outwards, and then there's sort of a separate central region. This is just a closer view, or more detailed view. So this is showing us the 4 symbols, or as they're known as the 4 guardians. And these 4 sort of characters or figures divide the 28 regions into 4 sections, and they divide the year into 4 sections. So we have the azure dragon of the east, and this represents spring. Now, for those of you who don't know, unlike Western mythology, the dragon is rarely depicted as a malevolent force in more Eastern mythology. It's generally considered to be both benevolent and auspicious, signifying, things to come. It's also associated with the emperor, and therefore it's linked with the red bird, or the vermilion bird, as we'll talk about in a moment, which is associated with the empress. And then the dragon is associated, in this case, with the element wood. Remember, they divided things into 5 elements here. So the dragon is connected with the element of wood. Moving on to the black tortoise of the north. This represents winter, and it's also a symbol of longevity. The tortoise of the north is often depicted together with a snake, and the union of these 2 creatures was thought to have created the earth in some Eastern mythologies. And it's associated with the element water, and that kind of makes sense there with the tortoise and the snake. The white tiger of the west represents fall. This tiger is often seen as a protector, and was thought to guard over the armies of the emperor and protect the spirits of the dead. This one was associated with the element metal. And then there's the vermilion bird of the south, and this represents summer. This bird is often seen as a phoenix, which is associated with good fortune. And like I said before, it's paired with a dragon and associated with the element of fire. These are how we divide these 28 mansions into these 4 sections. We can actually see that the 28 constellations sort of very roughly map out the shape of these 4 larger constellations, kind of like constellations within constellations, constellationception. You know, you can use your imagination here, of course, as we already know with looking at asterisms in the stars, that a lot of it is up to your imagination. This is dividing out the actual 28 mansions themselves, and the main constellations associated with those parts of astrology. We're not going to dive too deeply into what they mean for astrology in Chinese culture, but that's something you can definitely research for yourself. But again, this is very similar to how Western astrology works, only this, in this case, is tied to the path of the moon through the sky. There are other ways that traditional Chinese astronomy divides the sky. Sometimes it is divided, let's just go back over here. Sometimes it's divided into 3 enclosures, which are represented by these longer star patterns that represent walls. And so there is the purple forbidden enclosure, which is in the northern part of the night sky right up here. There's the supreme palace enclosure, which, let's see, nope, it's somewhere else. There it is. Nope. Oh, this is the heavenly market enclosure right over here. So you can see these sort of walls enclosing that part. And then, of course, I've lost the other enclosure. They're not as color-coded on here. I believe it might be somewhere around down here. But again, just a different way that we can divide the Chinese astronomy night sky. Now, it's kind of funny. Chinese astronomy, ancient Chinese astronomy spanned so many centuries and millennia that of those 283 asterisms I mentioned earlier, 6 of them were actually lost because of precession. So there's actually recordings in history of ancient Chinese astronomers not being able to see 6 of these constellations because of how long Chinese astronomy has lasted and the Earth's precession basically moving their view of the stars out of their sight. So it's kind of crazy that there is actually, again, recorded history of the night sky changing in these ways. We've been looking at the stars for so long that yeah, we've been watching the stars change since the beginning of time. Cynthia, thanks for tuning in, and you're welcome. I'm glad that this has given you an interest in astronomy. Hopefully you're learning something and being encouraged to learn even more on your own. So we have a little bit of time here, so if you have any more questions, please go ahead and pop those in the comment section. But the next section I am going to cover is Aztec astronomy, but we are approaching the end of the stream, so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to save that for next week, because next week what we're going to do is we are going to dive into Native American astronomy, because there is a lot to talk about when it comes to Native American astronomy. We will talk about Aztec stars and how they saw the night sky, and there is there is limited knowledge of sort of Central American cultures, mostly because of the Spanish conquest of the 16th century. Luckily for us, though, it became pretty popular amongst North American colonists to collect these drawings called Tlacuilias. I probably butchered that pronunciation, but basically they're just traditional drawings of Aztec astronomy. And so we do have some accounts from 16th century, mostly Spanish explorers and missionaries. And so there's a little bit of evidence there, but we'll talk about that. And again, Native North American cultures are not monolithic, so there are a lot of different cultures. We'll talk about the Dakota and Lakota people, how they saw the stars. And we'll dive into the Navajo and their views of the sky. We'll look at some Mayan cultures. They looked at the stars a little bit differently, other Central America. And we may even talk a little bit about Hawaiian star cultures. We can consider those as part of the broader North American family, or we can expand things to Polynesian astronomy as well. All right. So it looks like we don't have any more questions popping up. But to everyone who tuned in and chimed in, thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting too. It's kind of helpful. It's kind of nice for me, just knowing that you all are watching, and it's kind of a fun sort of conversation we can have. Again, I'd encourage you to watch all of our previous live streams where we've dived in depth to a lot of other topics, as well as just star tours. And of course, if you want a real star tour under a real night sky, or a simulation of a real night sky, please come to the Planetarium. We are once again open to the public starting this Wednesday, and tickets are on sale. Don't forget that we do have a limited capacity right now for safety, and our schedule is set up in a way that we are able to keep things safe and clean between the shows. So don't worry, we are taking all that into consideration. But again, it is first come, first serve, so please reserve your tickets online if you want to ensure that you're going to be able to check it out. And of course, come to Science City as well. You might see me in Science City sometimes too. Yeah, buy tickets online now. We can't wait to see you back at Union Station. And I can't wait to see you for our next live stream, which will be next Monday. Again, we are going to dive into Native American mythology and sky cultures, and should be a lot of fun and should be really interesting. To everyone who tuned in today, though, thank you so much. Once again, I am Patrick Hess, your Planetarium Specialist, signing off for another live stream. I hope you all have an amazing week, and I hope to see you under the stars of the Planetarium real soon. Goodbye, everyone.